Hello everyone, I'm Hannah from Talented Ladies Club, and today I have the very lovely Rianda Markram from LHS Solicitors in London. Hi Rianda.
Hello. Hello, Anna. Hello, everyone.
Rianda is here to talk about how you get paid. So as a former freelancer myself, I know all too well the stresses of having done the work and sent your invoice in, and then the client not paying you. And it's really, I find it really difficult. And I've actually, Rianda has helped me in the past with her advice to get paid from very difficult clients. So I'm going to hand over to you, Rianda, in just a second to talk about this. In the meantime, if anyone on this call has any questions they would like to ask Rianda, either general ones or about your personal situation, you are very welcome to ask them throughout, and I'll put them to Rianda at the end. Just if you have a look at your control bar on the right hand side of your screen, you'll see an option there to ask questions. So just feel free to type them in as we go through, and I'll ask them of Rianda after she's finished. But so Rianda, first of all, how can we increase our chances of getting paid?
Hello, Anna. Hello, everyone. The first thing I would suggest basically is that you've always got to minimize your risk when you are looking at who you're dealing with. Now, there's a few things obviously that you can do. One of the first things I think that we need to discuss is, well, how can you spot someone who's potentially going to be a bad payer at the end of the day? So if you think about the steps that you can take from a practical point of view, and these are all steps that you can do yourself. Most of them are free. Some of them come at very low cost, £10 and under. So the practical steps that you can take is firstly doing a few searches. So if you, for example, are going to deal with someone you've never worked with before, is do a Google search, for example, see if they've got a website, see if they've got any reviews, or just in general, what comes up when you do look at them online. The other thing that you can do, if it's a limited company, you can do a company's house search. It's a free search on company's house website to see if they filed accounts recently and what those accounts say. That's all public record. Another thing that you can do, which I think is one of the most important things that you can do, is to do a search on Trust Online. Now that does cost you between £4 and £10 to do the search, but that will tell you whether there's any outstanding county court judgments against a business or individual that you want to do business with. Again, if you see that there is a whole host of CCJs outstanding against them, then you're unlikely to do business with them, or if you are, you'll make sure you get payment up front. Another thing that is quite an easy thing to do is to ask for references. You can ask, for example, for a bank reference or customer or supplier reference, and then you can also follow up on that to see whether those are genuine references. Lastly, I think what you can do is to make sure your paperwork, like your terms and conditions, for example, deals with the matter properly. So what I mean by that is, if you don't know someone, for example, you're either going to ask for payment up front, or you're going to ask them to pay 50% up front, or potentially give them very short payment terms, so 7 or 14 days, for example. So that's a good way to try and spot someone who is going to be potentially a bad payer. I don't know if anyone, Hannah, if you've got any questions or anything on that, as far as spotting someone who's potentially going to be a bad payer.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree on the asking for money up front. And I know that, in fact, Carrie, that I work with, she's design, and sometimes when she's asked for payments for money up front, they've said they will pay it, and she's refused to start work until they have, and the money's never come in. So that she's had a lucky escape there, because obviously if they're not prepared to pay that money up front, then they were never going to pay in the end. I mean, it does put some clients off, but we with Talented Ladies Club, when I do anything with a new supplier, they always ask 50% up front, and I'm always happy to pay it. Because I trust that they're going to do a good job, because I've researched people well, so I know my supplier is honest. I know they're going to deliver to high standard, and it shows I'm going to pay them in the end anyway, so I'm quite happy to pay up front. So yes, anyone who doesn't do so, I think that is a massive warning sign. And I didn't know about the Trust Online. That's a really good tip. So I didn't know about that.
Yeah, as I say, it's between £4 and £10 because the more searches you do, the more expensive it gets. And that's why I say if you just do one search, I think it's £4, or it's two for £8, or three for £10, or something like that. But I do a deal the more searches you do against the entity. But it's a good website to choose. And as I say, it does give you valuable information to minimize your risk.
And I have to
Yeah.
if you're doing a considerable project, I've had clients who've owed me a couple of £1,000, and if you just £4 to check them out beforehand against the potential risk of not getting paid, or the stress as well, because even if you do get paid in the end, if you've chased them for 2 months and you get sleepless nights because the injustice of it, because you've done the work and they haven't paid you. So, £4 for the knowledge that this is someone who hasn't got a string of bad debts is money to spend, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other searches that I talked about, most of them are free searches. So you can do that yourself. You don't have to pay someone to do those searches and to check references and, to go online and do some homework, just so that you know who you're dealing with, because then you're immediately putting yourself in a better position.
Absolutely. And you mentioned about terms and conditions. So I know, and I actually didn't realise this for a long time, that legally you have to, if you have payment terms, you need to advise your client of that before they accept the work. Isn't that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the important thing with terms and conditions, when you think about terms and conditions, the principle is agree it up front so that there is no doubt about what those terms are, and make sure that a lot of people agreed in writing up front, and they reiterate those terms on an invoice or on an embedded link on an email, which is also a good way of doing it, because then you're giving that information time and time again. Because from a legal point of view, on a business-to-business agreement, yes, you can enter into verbal agreements that are legally binding, but it does give you a problem at the end of the day if there is a dispute, basically, because then there is no clear evidence where you can say to a court, for example, the judge, have a look at this. This is what we agreed. This sets out the terms clearly. So when you think about terms and conditions, the most important things that you need to deal with is, so your details. So if you're, for example, a limited company, you need to make clear that you're a limited company. So the limited company full details with LTD behind the name, your address, and then who you're dealing with. Are you dealing with a sole trader? So Joe Bloggs, for example, trading as Joe Bloggs Garage. Or are you dealing with a limited company? Then it would be the company name with LTD behind the name, their address. Basically, the next thing you'll deal with is what's the goods or services that you're going to render to them, the amount that they're going to pay, is that including or excluding VAT? So be as clear as you can on those terms. How payment will work. And if, for example, if you don't accept checks, because a lot of people don't nowadays, make that clear and just say this is the agreement with regard to payment, and also the consequences of non-payment. So, for example, make provision for saying if you pay me late, then these are the late payment charges that I'm going to charge you. Because then everybody knows where they stand. And as I say, it's a good idea to reiterate those terms that you agree in writing up front on your invoice or on your emails as an embedded link.
And you could put them on, if you're sending someone a quote and a Word doc, for example, you could just put that at the bottom of the Word doc, can't you?
Yes, and obviously on your email say the terms that we agreed, please find it attached, and these terms will govern the position, and everyone just acts according to those terms.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important point, that however legally binding a verbal agreement is, it's difficult if you do end up in a court. It's much easier if you have proof that when they sent an email to you saying, yes, you're hired, they were accepting the terms and conditions that you've clearly emailed them.
Yes, because you don't want to be in a scenario where it's he said, she said with regard to what the terms were, because that can easily go against you if you do end up in court. Whereas if you've got a clear agreement, what you also need to just make sure of is that your terms are the ones that are accepted. I mean, here's an example. So if me and you enter into an agreement, you send me your terms, I send you my terms, that is called battle of the forms, basically. So then it's you thinking your terms apply, I think my terms apply, and just in general, from a legal point of view, 99% of the time, the courts will take the terms that were sent last as the terms that will dictate the position. So from that point of view, there needs to be clarity on exactly whose terms apply. So you always need to make sure. So if someone sends, for example, their terms back after you've sent yours, just say, sorry, can't accept them. If you want to do business with me, it's on my terms, and my terms will apply. So if you're now going to move forward, it's on my terms, and you make that clear.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know any of that, so that's really important to do. Um, so beyond checking them out in advance, potentially asking 50% or even the full amount up front, um, and making sure that you have your terms and conditions sent across to them and they have agreed to them, what else can you do to protect yourself in advance, or is that it?
I mean, there's another option. Some people consider, for example, getting credit insurance, if they, especially on the bigger transactions where you're dealing with someone they haven't dealt with before. That is an option because in most cases they'll also do some checks, obviously, from an insurance point of view, just to make sure that the person you're dealing with is not what we call a man of straw, meaning someone who's likely just to disappear at the end of the day. So terms and conditions, very important, yes, checking out to make sure you know who you're dealing with, that is very, very important. And then also, once you've actually rendered the service and once everything is kicked in, obviously you get to the next stage of invoicing. Now this is where there's some, there's some really interesting statistics around the fact that small businesses sometimes, take years to claim debt that they're entitled to. Now, obviously from a legal point of view, you've got a maximum normally of 6 years to claim debt. But the longer you wait to claim the debt, the more difficult it potentially becomes. Because let's use an example. If I ask you 4 years after you've done work, or I've done work for you to pay me, then you can probably come up with all sorts of excuses or disputes. And then because of the time that's lapsed, it's going to be very difficult to try and find evidence to substantiate the claim if you then want to go to court. So even though you technically can go to court, you're just making life really difficult for yourself. So having a proper system of invoicing and then chasing those invoices. So a lot of people nowadays use cloud accounting services, for example. That's more of an automated system to save themselves the hassle, and also then to make sure you act almost immediately and don't let things drag on when you're chasing debt. I think for us, from a legal point of view, it makes things so much easier if you deal with things immediately because all the evidence is there. Everyone can make their statements. You can get the information quickly. And you can also deal with it rather quickly.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned earlier about putting in your T&Cs about late payment charges. So there are legal things there to protect you, aren't there? There is a set amount that you can charge and interest as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, on business-to-business debt, and this is obviously so not when you're dealing with consumers, but on business-to-business debt, even if you've got no agreement on what the late payment charges would be, you are still entitled to add what's called statutory interest under the Late Payment of Commercial Debts Act. Now, I mean, that's a mouthful, but all it basically means is when you've got an outstanding invoice that's been late for more than 30 days, you are entitled to start adding interest and also compensation on the interest. So the compensation basically is £40 for invoices up to £1,000, over £1,000 up to £10,000 is £70, and then if you go over £10,000, it's £100 compensation fee. Now those are the once-off fees basically that you can charge automatically, and that's per invoice. So if you've got 10 invoices of £70 each, that's basically been paid late. That is £40 per invoice that you can automatically add on as a late payment charge.
And
now,
that's a good tool I've used in the past. When a client has been a little bit late in paying me, I've sort of said, well, I am actually entitled to make these charges to you now. If you pay me within 48 hours, I will waive those charges. So sometimes you can use that as a tool to encourage businesses to pay quickly.
I agree with you 100%, and that is something that a lot of the businesses that we advise daily, that they also use basically as an encouragement to get someone just to pay up. And if they don't, then you obviously add the compensation fee and, as I say, the interest on top of that. There is really good guidance on that as well on the government pages on just how to work out the actual interest calculation on top of that compensation. And it does add up at the end of the day. And if you're legally entitled to it and you're forced to take action against someone and spend time to chase them for money that they owe you and that they should pay, then I see no reason why you shouldn't claim that money that you're entitled to.
Absolutely. I mean, especially if you're a freelancer, your time is your product, and you bill clients according to the time you spend on their work. And then if you're spending time chasing for payment, then that's time you're not working. That is billable time.
Yeah, you are also entitled under the legislation to charge a reasonable debt collection cost on top of the actual interest and the compensation amount that I've talked about. So a lot of people do sometimes decide, especially if they've got several debts outstanding, to use debt collectors, for example, to help them chase the debts. And those amounts basically that you're entitled to then covers that, meaning you're not out of pocket for having to chase people who owe you money.
Okay, that's good to know. And you mentioned that, so you don't have to, in your terms and conditions, you don't have to just put the statutory amount in there. You can set your own penalties. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can. What you just need to, I mean, if you do set your own contractual interest, is what it's called, then yes, obviously you will follow the contractual interest always. Now, a lot of people just have a sentence to say, on late payment, I reserve my right to charge you interest as per the Late Payment of Commercial Debts Act. Basic, straightforward, and then you just follow the government one, because as that one goes up, you know, yours will go up as well. Or what some people do basically is they have their own, to say, use an example, £10 per month if you pay me late per invoice. Now, you've got to make sure that yours is kind of similar or as reasonable as the government one, because a lot of people, I find, actually put something in which will give them a lesser amount at the end of the day. So they're actually losing out. But as a guideline, as I say, a lot of the small businesses that we work with and that we advise just refer to the statutory late payment.
And what would happen if you set an outrageous, if you said it's £1,000 a month if you don't pay me, and that ended up going to court? Is a magistrate likely to dismiss that fee if you put something outrageous in there? So if they've agreed your terms and conditions up front, you've done the work, they haven't paid you, you've now taken them to the small claims court, but you've put a huge amount on as a penalty.
Well, I think you've actually hit the nail on the head. If it's a penalty, it's likely to be unenforceable, actually, in the county.
Okay.
Yeah, because a penalty clause like that will be unenforceable in most cases. So in general terms, when a judge in the county court does look at what the parties agreed, if it does come down as to that being seen as a penalty rather than as a fair amount for that extra effort, I'd like to say, then they're unlikely to enforce that.
Okay. Okay, great. I've had some questions emailed in. I can see that people have asked some on here. Okay. Jo asks, can you repeat the name of the regulations, because she missed it? That was for the, I would imagine, for the penalty.
The Late Payment of Commercial Debt Act.
The Late Payment of Commercial Debt Act.
Yes. And Jo, if you go onto the government pages, basically, then if you just put in late payment on the .gov.uk pages, there is an interest calculator on there as well.
What I'll do, when I send the recording of this out, I'll add the link in, because it's something that the .gov.uk website is so good. I refer to it so often, and they do have a really easy to understand section on this. It explains really clearly, and as Rianda says, they have a calculator, so you can put in how much you're owed and how long it's been. And Jo says, perfect, thank you very much.
There is another website Hannah, that I will send you the link for, that does give, if the government one doesn't give the calculator, there is another one that I will email you, which is a free site, which specialises in late payment calculations. I will send that to you as well, then you can forward that on to Jo. Okay,
brilliant. I've had a question here from someone saying, how much time should I give a client to pay? So firstly, to put in their terms and conditions, and then once they're late, how quickly should they chase them? So first of all, what sort of time frame do you recommend putting in T&Cs?
Most people would use 30 days as a standard period, basically, for payment. 30 days from invoice. And I mean, I would normally suggest that as soon as the 30 days is up, to send your first reminder letter. And everybody's different. I mean, we'd normally suggest you do at least 1 or 2 reminder letters, and then you do your letter basically saying, right, this is it. This matter is now, it's now long overdue. I've now made the decision to take this further. And you give them basically a notice of your intention to go to court, which is called a letter before action, giving them, a final deadline to pay, after which you will be issuing the claim against them in the county court without further notice. And normally suggest between 7 to 14 days for that notice, basically, which you can also use as evidence in court to make it clear that you have given the notice.
And I know that that's a project that you helped me out on with a client that had stopped even replying to any of my emails. I sent them a letter that you recommended, Rianda, and the MD phoned you within an hour. So I call it the magic letter.
Yeah, no, exactly. And everyone should have, that in their back pocket, I almost want to say, is 1 or 2 reminder letters, and then that fine. And that's just a personal opinion, to say 1 or 2 reminder letters, and then you do the letter before action, giving them the final 7 or 14 days to pay before you would issue the claim.
Brilliant. Okay. And Lucy asks, what if they have a different time span for payment? So, for example, if their payment terms are 60 days and yours are 30, how do you negotiate that before you start work?
From a legal point of view, it's obviously up to the parties to decide then, because in circumstances like that, I would probably just go back and say, well, let's split it then. I mentioned 30, you mentioned 60, let's just split the difference basically and agree that we both compromise and meet in the middle. And you said that then obviously in the terms and conditions as the payment period. So 45 days, for example, in Lucy's example, for payment.
So then what you should do is then resend, if they agree, then resend your T&Cs with the 45-day period.
Amend it and you send it off basically and say, right, this is what we've agreed, so this is the final period. I mean, there's not much difference between the 30 and 60 days, and that's why I do think both parties should compromise on that.
Okay. And Sally asks, at what point do you start discussing payment terms before a job? So do you just wait to the quote, or do you have to verbalise it? What would you recommend?
I would probably suggest when you're discussing, when you know what you're going to do, so when you're discussing the terms of what the job will entail, the details of what you're going to do. As soon as you get to the point where you almost finalize that, I would definitely suggest you bring that into the conversation to say, right, got a good idea of what we're going to do, or the work that you want me to do. Now we just need to finalize the price, basically, because there's more than one way that you can look at that. Freelancers, you guys would normally look at either getting paid per hour on work that you do, or for a whole project. So the moment you start getting a feeling for what you're going to do, and in your mind you already know this is kind of what I'm going to look at, then you need to raise that subject with the other party and say, right, now that we know what we're looking at and what you expect me to do, I've got a good indication of how long it'll take. Now we just need to discuss pricing and how we're going to sort that out, whether it's going to be per hour basis or whether that's going to be on a full fixed price basis. But all of that needs to be agreed up front, because again, if you start work without knowing what the end price would be from a legal point of view, the principle then is a reasonable sum. But as you can imagine, that leaves it open for debate, because in my mind, I may think in my industry, my work is worth £200 an hour, and someone else may think, no, it's worth £50 an hour. So that's why I say it's very important that you agree this up front and get it in the terms and conditions in writing, because then there can be no dispute at the end of the day.
It's one of those things that you only regret not doing once things have gone wrong, and you think, I wish I'd spent the time doing that up front.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you have a little checklist of these minor things just to discuss beforehand, you save yourself all that hassle. And I mean, you've been through it, Hannah. You know, once or twice getting your fingers burned by someone that doesn't pay you makes you realize very quickly that you need to minimize your risk, because at the end of the day, you're not a charity. You guys are in business, so you need to earn a profit, you need to make money. And the only way you can do that, I think personally, is to be prepared, do the homework, put yourself in that position where you at least know 99% you're going to get paid at the end of the day, rather than having to struggle to get the money in after you've spent all that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Liz asks, and I don't know if there is such a thing, but is there a blacklist of bad payers? But I guess in the sort of the advice you gave at the beginning about the searches, there's certainly some evidence there. I mean, if they've had
Yeah,
CCJs or they haven't submitted their accounts if they're a limited company.
yeah. There isn't a blacklist as such from a legal point of view, but also credit agencies, for example, collate all this evidence, all this information. So Equifax, credit expert, there's all sorts of credit agencies like that where you can, for example, search other businesses' credit records if they're limited companies. So that's kind of what I think a lot of people, when they think about blacklist, that's the kind of thing that they're talking about. But I know sometimes banks will say, or not banks, but mobile companies, for example, will say, well, we're going to put you on some sort of blacklist. But that's probably just their own internal list that they're referring to, where they put their own people who don't pay their accounts, because there isn't a government list where you can put someone's name. It's only reflected on Trust Online when there is a CCJ against you, or when, for example, your credit record shows that you've got a history of not paying the bank or the mobile company or whatever. And that will be on Equifax, as I say, is probably the biggest one in the UK. Or credit expert. I can't remember the names of the other ones, but just off the top of my head, but those are the ones you'd be looking at.
Okay. I just got a couple more questions. Just so everyone knows here, Rianda's going to come back and do another webinar on what to do about CCJ. So, small court, making a claims to the small claims court, if I can
Yeah.
spit it out. So, yes, if you are in a position whereby everything that we're talking about now has failed and the customer has not paid you, how you can best prepare for a small claims court, what to expect, and we will cover that off in another webinar. This one today is just going to cover how you can best protect yourself. But just one last question someone was saying is at what point do you need a solicitor, and at what point would you call one up or would you get one involved, and then how do you find one?
If your claim is undisputed and under £10,000, then I would always suggest doing it on your own through the county court without a solicitor. I mean, two main reasons. The process is relatively straightforward in the county court as far as small claims are concerned. And, the courts do encourage people, to do it on their own, and they make it so that that you don't really need a solicitor. And the other reason is that you can't really recover solicitor's cost in the small claims courts. If you do use a solicitor, the majority of the cost would be paid by you in any case. You can't recover that from the other party. I mean, there's a very, very small sum that you can recover, and I'm talking normally like £100 or something, solicitor's cost, but I can guarantee you solicitor won't be working for £100. So if it's under 10,000 in the county court, undisputed, I'd always suggest that you give it a go yourself. There's loads of guidance available, again, on the government pages, on the procedure, and we will discuss that separately as well in another webinar. But yeah, I would always suggest people do that on their own. If your claim is disputed and it's a substantial amount of money, so we start talking about thousands of pounds, and you feel that the other party's arguments are becoming quite tricky and complex from a legal point of view, at that stage I would suggest that you start talking to local solicitors then and getting quotes basically on how much it would cost to help you. And if you can, try and see if you can nail down the solicitors on a potential fixed price to do everything, rather than agreeing an hourly rate, which is sometimes difficult to control because you don't know how much work the solicitor would need to do in preparation, how much letters they need to read or statements they need to do. So it can add up very quickly. So rather try and, if you can, find a solicitor who's willing to do it on a fixed cost basis.
I know from friends who've got divorced on an hourly basis, and every letter that they've received, their sister has to respond to, and it's just their costs have just gone up and up and up with each letter.
Yeah, so that's why, I mean, the Law Society also encouraging solicitors to try and agree fixed costs wherever possible.
Okay.
But yeah, as I say, in county court, if it's undisputed and under 10,000, I'd always suggest just doing it on your own.
Okay, and we'll do cover that off in our next webinar. So if someone does want to go to, or not, no one wants to, if someone needs to go to the small claims court, we will just talk you through the process and give you some tips on how to maximise your chances of success.
Yeah.
But before we go now, if anyone's got any more questions, please do ask them. But if you've got any final tips, Rianda?
I think the only other thing I think that we didn't really cover off is when you invoice. I think the important thing on your invoicing is to make sure that it's clear and simple. You know, call it an invoice because that is what it is. It's an invoice document. Give it a unique reference number so you can tie it into that specific client. Make sure you make the description of the work clear. If it was hourly, you know, obviously give a clear breakdown. Does it include or exclude VAT, for example? When you get to the totals, make sure you give that breakdown. And very, very important on an invoice to remember to put your bank details, because that's what you want people to know at the end of the day, is where to put the money. And as I said earlier, if you don't accept checks, make that clear as well. Just make that statement and make that clear across the board. So that you make sure you get your payment in the method that you would like to be paid.
And I guess
and follow up on invoices. You know, don't let it drag on. Just follow up on it.
okay, and I guess reiterating your payment terms on the invoice again, just
Yeah.
you know, if it gets into an accounts department, they've got it all in one place.
Yeah, and as I said, maybe just drop something in your embed a link on your email as standard, because obviously that doesn't take 2 seconds to set up, but it will, you know, make it clear every time, so that there is no doubt as to what your terms are, and someone can literally just click on it if they're uncertain or they want to check something, and there can be no dispute at the end of the day.
When you say embed a link, where would that link go to?
Oh, you can put it under your, you know, under your when you've got your signature with your contact number, for example. A lot of people have email disclaimers, and you can even put it into your email disclaimer.
But then when if they clicked on that, where would they go?
Well, if you've got, for example, a Word document just set up, and you know, on that link, so it just pops up with your standard terms and conditions on your letterhead, for example.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
As I say, it's still, you can only really do that if you've already agreed the terms up front, because again, if we enter into an agreement, you do the work for me, and then, you know, and then I want to say later on, oh yes, by the way, I'm only going to pay you £10, and we didn't agree anything up front. As I said, that's make it difficult. So that's why it's so important to make sure you agree the terms in writing up front, but just reiterate it all the time on your invoice at the back or on an embedded link, so that there is no doubt, and it'll be clear evidence in court.
Okay. Fantastic, thank you. That's been really helpful. I've made loads of notes. Like I say to everyone, I will put links to everything Rianda mentions in the playback email. We haven't got any more questions, so thank you so much, Rianda, and we will book the next webinar about small claims court very soon. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
And Wife Wong says thank you as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.